Greetings, spiritual pilgrims. We finished the Pilgrim's Regress last week, and this week and next week, we're going to spend a little time looking at Lewis's Afterward to the third edition of Pilgrim's Regress. He wrote this Afterward 10 years after the original publishing, which gave him quite a while to think back on his earliest work and critique it from a Christian viewpoint, 10 years steeped in wisdom, and rather than the new Christian that he was when he wrote it. Lewis is extremely honest with his readers at all time, and he's extremely honest about what he has learned about himself, which takes a very noble character to share that level of intimacy with the world. He almost always prefaces a book with his known shortcomings before offering us his wisdom. And he many times writes an afterword to inform his readers what the earned wisdom of time after the writing has taught him. Unlike so many authors of today, Lewis has a sense of humor about himself, which is willing to let us all in on the joke and the laugh. That is called spiritual and emotional health. If he was wrong, then he doesn't wish to cover it up. He wishes to correct it, and he wishes to correct it in himself and correct it in his teachings, both past and future. A healthy ability to laugh at oneself has been lost. It is why SNL hasn't been funny since politically correct language was foisted upon us. It is why people with Dumbo ears and Mapamundis tattooed over their entire bodies get triggered if you look at them like a sideshow, which, as far as I can tell, the aesthetics which are popular in today's youth come straight out of the 1920s freak and geek shows at circuses. But I shouldn't have said that. It might upset the bearded lady down at the library trying to groom your child. We wouldn't want that now, would we? Hell hath no fury like a bearded lady with testicles. People used to pay good money to see this kind of extreme self-degradation, but you can get it for free from the barista down at the bookstore nowadays. I save so much money on entertainment now, it's ridiculous. I canceled all my streaming services because the Hippodrome down at Sheds, Barnes, and Ignobles is all the entertainment I need. It is why the entire world tiptoes around the most absurd self-expressions without so much as a giggle. If they name it self-expression, it becomes verboten in the progressive mindset. It is wrong-think, and wrong-think is a tactic of the Nazis, the communists, and any dictator who wishes to keep people from using their minds to defend themselves against the evil one and the evil one's minions. To giggle is to commit secular heresy, and to giggle might make the ridiculous person have to pause and look at themselves hard enough to perhaps realize that Dumbo ears and Mapamundis over your face doesn't impress anyone. I can't help but think about the reporter who looked like they were, I think it was a CNN reporter, who looked like they were going to pass out when one of the leaders of Africa, when she asked him about his intention towards the alphabet community in Africa, his response was something along the lines of, "Do you know what they do? It is disgusting." Seeing the look on that woman's face was worth $1 million. She just didn't know how to even hear such secular blasphemy. This man had been so sheltered his entire life that he just recently learned what the alphabet community is fighting for and what they do. And his first, and might I add, proper response was nausea. Remember when you could tell a blonde joke to a blonde and they could laugh because they knew you wouldn't be telling them if you really thought that all blondes were stupid? Remember when kids told Pollock jokes, and let's be honest, how many of them even knew what a Pollock was? For years in elementary school, I thought it was another name for stupid. When I realized what it was talking about, I filed it away with my blonde jokes. Something which was funny, but didn't really have to hold any truth in it, and obviously was not meant to indict an entire hair color or an entire race. I was raised in a house where I knew that all races had their own idiots and their own clowns. I was also taught never to take myself too seriously. A healthy bit of self-deprecation helps keep you emotionally stable and even likable to those around you. If you don't have any friends, Perhaps you need to be a little more self-deprecating. Being able to joke about oneself and others was also a way in which society nudged people into the right direction and into the melting pot that used to be. We stopped making fun of stupid things because it might upset stupid people. Well, that was the entire point. You upset the stupid enough, and maybe they will turn from their stupidity and save their own souls. Johnny, doesn't Jesus want us to love everyone? Yes, he absolutely does. But I think he's very clear about the stupidity of loving everything. To love someone is to teach them wisdom. If you teach them to love their own opinions over the wisdom of the past, then you teach them to be fools, and you should get acquainted with the millstone necklace. Johnny, I think you are getting a little mean. Did you know that only 40 short years ago, everything I'm saying right now was considered common sense? Common sense. Each and every line of this would have been taught to children by their fathers and their mothers with serious team-like intentions. Our children don't even receive that luxury anymore. And those that have undermined their spiritual development have convinced many that it was the loving thing to do. Let that sink in a moment, ye little froggies. The water is starting to boil, so the time for soft words is over. Let's read a little, shall we? Proverbs 18, 2-3 says this: fools have no interest in understanding. They only want to air their own opinions. Doing wrong leads to disgrace, and scandalous behavior brings contempt. Proverbs 1:22 says, fools, how long will you love being ignorant? How long will you make fun of wisdom? How long will you hate knowledge? Proverbs 23:9, do not speak to fools, for they will scorn your prudent words. So if I'm getting you heated, I would suggest turning the channel, because I stick to the linguistic teachings of the book. And the book is harsh when it needs to be harsh. There is no help here for the staunch fool. Everything I've said is either supportable through the scripture or demonstrable in our own history. I've not said it with meanness in my heart, but with hopefully comedic concern. Fools have been taught to be outraged at the wrong things, and the ones that indoctrinated them profit daily from their foolishness. Your kid is being groomed to not only provide services to sick adults, but also to keep the lucre flowing to surgeons who care more about their yachts than they will ever care about your child. There is no gentle way to bring the lost sheep back into the fold anymore. Those days are over. The days of catering to the sensitive seeker, those days are over. The time to shout loudly and clearly to those with a little brain still intact is upon us. They must be snatched from the cliffside or allowed to jump after their friends. I'm going to snatch as many as I can, and if that gets me called mean by the lemmings with blue hair, then so be it. They can only continue yelling at me till the gravity teaches them the foolishness that the lemming pudding at the bottom of the cliff would have liked to have been aware of before jumping. I have been called worse by better, so consider me thick-skinned and mission-minded. I am as devoted to the cause of Jesus Christ as the woke are to the cause of self, Satan, and stupidity. We are no longer talking about the mistake of a tattoo that makes you look silly when you are old, or an earlobe that will never look the same again. No, we are talking about an agenda that literally has a surgery to nullify sex in woke lunatics. If you don't know what that means, look it up. Align surgical associates out of, do I really need to say it, California. Another circus analogy eludes me right now. Something about the birth rate of suckers, I think. The powers that be have convinced an entire generation that no matter what the real science says about people not being born that way, to base their entire personhood on their sexual urges anyway. That is impressive beyond measure. I stand awed by the enemy's ability to grab populations by the nose and force them to grin and enjoy their daily pig slop. But also impressed at the ability that sex has to create monstrous and crippled slaves. Absolutely impressive. The devil may be a lot of things, but ignorant he is not. I wish Lewis were still alive so that I could read his books on the nonsense that has been the last 30 years of our lives. Of course, let's be fair. We aren't giving the progressives enough credit here, are we? He probably would have ended up dead, suicide probably, and the media would have probably accused him of something horrible to discredit him. They only protect their own. Aren't we learning that recently? Can't wait till the whole story comes out. Lewis is going to speak to us about the uniqueness of his journey to Jesus Christ and with Jesus Christ. It was a journey that literally took an intellect as large as his to make. He confesses openly that most people don't have to travel the same path that he took. But in his early Christian days, he believed that it was how everybody got there. His journey takes him from popular realism, that's the belief that there is no reality beyond the observable physical world, to philosophical idealism, that is the belief that there is an unknowable absolute beyond the physical world, to pantheism, the belief that God is immanent in the physical world while ignoring or denying God's transcendence, to theism, belief in God or gods, particularly belief in one creator God of the universe. And finally, he arrived at Christianity, the belief in all the teachings of Christ about God and the world. My own personal journey took me from beginning with Christianity in my youth to theism, to no belief system at all, really. I wouldn't call it atheism, but rather don't care theism. Back to Christianity when I met the man on the cross himself in as real a way as can be conceived spiritually. It was then that I realized that the spiritual world was actually more solid and more demanding than the physical realm. Science is just starting to hint at this, or at least to confess this. Start doing your work in the spiritual realm, your discipline, and you will begin to notice this realm begin to stretch thin and become transparent, and that realm to become more solid than anything you have ever touched. Talking these things to the spiritually blind is only useful insofar as they receive information on which to act when their spiritual eyes one day get opened, hopefully. In every other way, it is like speaking to the dead about life. It is why extremely unwise people belittle spiritual Christians so much. We are comedic to them. We are a joke to them, just as comedic as the philosopher in Plato's cave is when he returns to tell those in chains at the back of the cave the beauty of what lies outside the cave. Every truly great thinker throughout time has at least stuck his head part ways outside the cave and come back to report about it to us. And still, the progressives are able to convince the masses that they are the truly intelligent and enlightened ones for refusing any wisdom or knowledge which requires self-sacrifice and spiritual discipline, to reject every last bit of wisdom handed down from thousands of years. Woo, they're smart. The greatest knowledge that the evil have to offer their slaves is the knowledge of the left-hand path. The knowledge received when the spirit itself becomes so seared by sin that it can no longer discern good from bad and therefore inverts them for selfish reasons. The same knowledge was offered to Adam and Eve in the garden. You can be like gods. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. They just fire teachers that require any kind of work out of them. Easier to blame the smart people for being smart than to blame the stupid people for being stupid. They see us as charlatans who hold some fictional, secret knowledge over them in order to control them at the least and make money from them at the worst. all the while having to ignore every single great work ever passed down to us, both literature and art, to pull off that level of stupidity. Even works like To Kill a Mockingbird, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Of Mice and Men, Animal Farm, 1984, A Wrinkle in Time, and many others that were pulled from different schools at different times throughout our nation's history to either remove verboten knowledge or to protect oversensitive egos. All while it was replaced with porn and CRT, and those things were heralded as perfectly acceptable for children and commendable, in fact. Aren't you glad times they are a-changin'? Lewis then goes on to admit that the word romance has lost all semblance of meaning and should be chucked out the window. It has become like the English word love, a word that can be abused by every person to justify every fetish they want to justify. I once had a person where I worked argue with me about my thoughts on homosexuals. They said, "Don't you want to be as intimate and close physically as you can get with what you love?" "No," said I. They looked at me as though I were lying to them, trying to weasel my way out with a simple no. They really thought I had to say that to defend my position, at least until I revealed the thimble that happened to be in plain sight for anybody who will look. I love my mother. I love my father. I love my children. Mickey D's loves to see a smile. None of these loves tempt me with the desire to be as close physically as I can get with those that I love. In fact, some of these loves demand that I do not. But now we have people who love their pets and stupid commercials which show skeletons kissing, so that when the X-ray is removed and sickness confronts us all, we must think to ourselves, "Oh dear me, how judgmental I have been when it's all the same thing, just skeletons all the way up." When you are a skeleton, you won't be kissing anyone. I guarantee it. You woke folks have been deceived. What was originally, I have to believe, a real concern about sexual roles in modern society and their legitimacy in a post-industrial and then post-internet world, the word got turned into acts of sex instead of society's treatment of genders. The only thing I can figure out is that the proliferation of porn has caused every once decent thought into having to be applied to the sex act itself, which used to make you a lecherous and undesirable person. If your concern is that sexual roles can be used as tyrannical weapons to keep unjust hierarchical structures in place, then listen to what Paul says about one of Jesus's ultimate aims for his creation, or for his mission. Galatians 3:28 says this: "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." This is not some woke gospel about heavenly reassignment surgery. This is not to say that males and females do not exist here in this world or there in the next. It is saying that in the kingdom of heaven, the hierarchical evils that do indeed exist within the satanic simulation will once and forever be destroyed, and all will enjoy equal justice, equal love, and equal respect. The right way, not the left way. I just bought and played a few hours of a video game called Gotham Knights. If you don't know it, it is a Warner Brother video game that lets you play the people that Bruce Wayne trained throughout the years. Why am I telling you this? Because some of you might be wondering why I talk about woke and sodomites in my lessons so often. In fact, at my last assignment, I had a woman who got very ugly about me online because she and my opinions didn't line up. At that time, I was above going after folks in the public forum, but I have grown since then. The company of lemmings is so less tedious than the company of truth, I'm sure. Truth requires you to act, while ignorance just requires you to fall off the edge like all the other lemmings. Anyway, she said in essence that I talk far too much about the woke nightmare, and that I should have, as a leader, led the way in putting on my straitjacket, strapping my mind control device to my face, getting my 6 feet behind thee, and that I should have told everyone to inject themselves with poison if I truly loved them and was a leader worth my salt. Well, I did the exact opposite, which made her and her husband my biggest fans. Which, if you haven't noticed, the numbers are out. Look it up and know this. We haven't even begun to watch the dominoes fall yet. Here it comes. Wait for it. I told you so. She never named me, so I will return the favor, but it was obvious whom she was going after. Remember this, folks. Jesus said to love our enemies, not forget that they exist or why. I am sending you out like sheep, says Jesus. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Let me rephrase that, because Christians seem to make the Bible say whatever the sensitive people want us to believe that it says instead of what it actually does say. The rape of the English language by the progressive left has left us unarmed for spiritual battle. My goal is to rearm you. Many Christians believe that loving your enemy means ignoring what they do and embracing them as blood family in spite of any true conversion or repentance on their part, which was always step number one for being baptized into the faith. That is a lie of the devil, perhaps his most effective lie in our time. If I replace some of Jesus's words with the definitions of the words he uses, so I'm not putting words into his mouth, I'm expanding the translation, if you will. Check behind me. Then this verse sounds like this. I am sending you out like a person regarded as a protected follower of God among rapacious, ferocious, and ferocious people. Because of that, be sharp in powers of judgment. Be astute and alert, just like a sly or treacherous creature, especially one who exploits a position of trust in order to betray it. But at the same time, be pure, guileless, and seemingly naive without causing harm, like a peaceful and conciliatory creature. She went after me because I mentioned this stuff in almost every sermon for about 5 years now. Yes, she went after me. She would absolutely get upset if I went after anyone, but no one ever sees themselves clearly, do they? They are always justified in their own minds. I am no exception. To anyone who thinks like her, let me explain myself to you. I preach it far less than the woke and sodomites preach it to me. I am not in every ounce of entertainment they consume. I am not in every bite that they eat. I am not in every video game they spend good money on. I am not upheld and celebrated by the leftist media arm of the Progressive Party. I am not at the mall waving my flag. I am not outside judges' homes who disagree with me making their lives hell. I am not standing in front of innocent people's restaurant tables screaming it in their faces. I am not burning down the cities to get my way. I am not taking over city blocks with no one to stand in my way. I am not protected by a media that will twist my story to protect my agenda. I am not demanding that I have a right to indoctrinate their children into my faith. In fact, I have been thrown out of the public sphere, the public education, and the public will. But I'll make a deal with you, woke nuts. For every purchased item that I don't have to hear you preaching at me, I will leave you out of one of my lessons. How's that sound to you? Y'all claim to love equality. My offer sounds like a balanced scale to me, but I know you too well. You might wonder what any of this had to do with what we are about to read from Lewis today. I suggest that if he had written this work today and this afterward in our predicament, it would include much of what I just said. He would have said it much more eloquently than I, but he would have said it. Like Lewis, I hope to see myself clearly, and I hope to be transformed into the image of Christ daily. Not a made-up, sensitive, emasculated buddy Jesus, but the scriptural King of Kings, who will enforce the King's peace. That being said, forgive me when I am too bold or too harsh, and know that my heart is for your good, not for your harm. Lewis does, at the last 2 paragraphs of today's reading, what we all need to do, especially those being used and abused by a satanic hierarchy for their own power and profit. They didn't scare enough of you last time into obeying. 20% rebellion against them was still enough to capsize their little boats for a while. So the hammer is coming. And from what I hear, it has an 80% death rate. You don't know fear yet. Fear is coming for those that are not quickened by the Spirit and unafraid of death. Freedom has a cost. Freedom has a high cost. Ask my Savior. Lewis, in today's closing paragraphs of today's reading, talks about the importance of a life that is reflected upon. If the hammer hurts your finger this time, it will probably hurt your finger next time. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. Ego is the inverse of knowledge. So let's apply that to pride. Pride equals 1 over wisdom, or 100% pride equals 1 over 0.01 wisdom, or better yet, the word problem would be said this way. Pathetically low wisdom equals perfect pride. The higher the wisdom, the lower the pride, and vice versa. I suggest a renaming of certain parades to lack of wisdom parades. It's not ugly, it means the same thing mathematically. I'm having too much fun. Back to the book. Lewis suggests to all of us in this portion of the Afterword to pay attention to ourselves, not in an evil, self-interested way, but in a Jesus way. If you want a critical theory that actually works, be critical of yourself, not of others. Why do you feel certain ways? In what ways did you feel before swallowing a lie? What have your actions resulted in? What do your desires truly point toward? And what pathetic things have you accepted as counterfeit joy? The only way to gain the mind of Christ is to die to oneself. And the only way to die to oneself is to study your own ego and pride enough to see how those things have blinded you from the cage that the devil and his people have constructed around you. You must know yourself enough to want that old man dead. When you become self-aware enough to realize the trap that you are in, then and only then will you have the courage to take the red pill, so to say. Then and only then can you see the cross of Christ as a victory over us instead of as our victory over him. We laughingly put a sign over his head that declared the King. He laughingly dropped into hell, waved his victory banner before the inmates of Tartarus, and shattered our known universe when he came up out of the grave to deny death its victory once and for all. Jesus people are not cowards. Want to know how to spot Jesus people? It's easy. And if I have to tell you, then you aren't there yet. Get thyself back to the cross. Know thyself through him. Jesus blew the lid off the whole satanic agenda and tied him up like a hog and threw him out of his own house. And he shares this knowledge with us freely through the mystery of the cross and the key to the mysteries themselves, aka an empty grave. I've preached for far too long. Time to read. The Afterword to the 3rd edition. On rereading this book 10 years after I wrote it, I find its chief faults to be those to which I myself least easily forgive in the books of other men. Needless obscurity and an uncharitable temper. There were 2 causes, I now realize, for the obscurity. On the intellectual side, my own progress had been from popular realism to philosophical idealism, from idealism to pantheism, from pantheism to theism, and from theism to Christianity. I still think this a very natural road, but I now know that it is a road very rarely trodden. In the early 30s, I did not know this. If I had had any notion of my own isolation, I should either have kept silent about my journey or else endeavored to describe it with more consideration for the reader's difficulties. As things were, I committed the same sort of blunder as one who should narrate his travels through the Gobi Desert on the assumption that this route was as familiar to the British public as the line from Euston to Crewe. And this original blunder was soon aggravated by profound change in the philosophical thought of our age. Idealism itself went out of fashion. The dynasty of Green, Bradley, and Bosanquet, I hope I pronounced that right, I doubt it, fell, and the world inhabited by philosophical students of my own generation became as alien to our successors as if not years but centuries had intervened. The second cause of obscurity was the unintentionally private meaning I then gave to the word romanticism. I would not now use this word to describe the experience which is central in this book. I would not indeed use it to describe anything, for I now believe it to be a word of such varying senses that it has become useless and should be banished from our vocabulary, even if we exclude the vulgar sense in which a romance means simply a love affair, peer and film star romance. I think we can distinguish at least 7 kinds of things which are called romantic. 1. Stories about dangerous adventure, particularly dangerous adventure in the past or in remote places, are romantic. In this sense, Dumas is a typically romantic author, and stories about sailing ships, the Foreign Legion, and the Rebellion of 1745 are usually romantic. 2. The marvelous is romantic, provided it does not make part of the believed religion. Thus, magicians, ghosts, fairies, witches, dragons, nymphs, and dwarves are romantic, angels less so. Greek gods are romantic in Mr. James Stephens or Mr. Maurice Hewlett, not so in Homer or Sophocles. In this sense, Malory, Bayardo, Aristo, Spencer, Tasso, Mrs. Radcliffe, Shelley, Coleridge, William Morris, and Mr. E.R. Edison are romantic authors. 3. The art dealing with titanic characters, emotions strained beyond the common pitch, and high-flown sentiments or codes of honor is romantic. I welcome the growing use of the word Romanesque to describe this type. In this sense, Ralston and Sidney are romantic, and so, though unsuccessfully, are Dryden's heroic dramas. And there's a good deal of romanticism in Corneille. I take it that Michelangelo is, in this sense, a romantic artist. 4. Romanticism can also mean the indulgence in abnormal and finally in anti-natural moods. The macabre is romantic, and so is an interest in torture and a love of death. This, if I understand them, is what M. Mario Praz and M. D. de Rougemont would mean by the word. In this sense, Tristan is Wagner's most romantic opera. Poe, Baudelaire, and Flaubert are romantic authors. Surrealism is romantic. 5. Egoism and subjectivism are romantic. In this sense, the typically romantic books are Werther and Rousseau's Confessions and the works of Byron and Proust. 6. Every revolt against existing civilization and conventions, whether it look forward to revolution or backward to the primitive, is called romantic by some people. Thus, Pseudo-Ossian, Epstein, D.H. Lawrence, Walt Whitman, and Wagner are romantic. 7. Sensibility to natural objects when solemn and enthusiastic is romantic. In this sense, the Prelude is the most romantic poem in the world, and there is much romanticism in Keats, Shelley, de Vigny, and de Musset, and I always say this wrong, Goethe, something like that. It will be seen, of course, that many writers are romantic on more than one account. Thus, Morris comes in my first class as well as my second, Mr. Edison in my second as well as my third, Rousseau in my sixth as well as my fifth, Shelley in my sixth and fifth, and so on. This may suggest some common root, whether historical or psychological, for all 7. But the real qualitative difference between them is shown by the fact that a liking for any one does not imply liking for the others. Though people who are romantic in different senses may turn to the same books, they turn to them for different reasons, and one half of William Morris's readers do not know how the other half live. It makes all the difference in the world whether you like Shelley because he provides a mythology or because he promises a revolution. Thus, I myself always loved the second kind of romanticism and detest the fourth and fifth kinds. I liked the first very little and the third only after I was grown up, as an acquired taste. But what I meant by romanticism when I wrote the Pilgrim's Regress, and what I would still be taken to mean on the title page of this book, was not exactly any one of these 7 things. What I meant was a particular recurrent experience which dominated my childhood and adolescence, and which I hastily called romantic because inanimate nature and marvelous literature were among the things that evoked it. I still believe that the experience is common, commonly misunderstood, and of immense importance. But I know now that in other minds it arises under other stimuli and is entangled with other irrelevancies, and that to bring it into the forefront of consciousness is not so easy as I once supposed. I will now try to describe it sufficiently to make the following pages intelligible. The experience is one of intense longing. It is distinguished from other longings by 2 things. In the first place, though the sense of what is acute and even painful, yet the mere wanting is felt to be somehow a delight. Other desires are felt as pleasures only if satisfaction is expected in the near future. Hunger is pleasant only while we know or believe that we are soon going to eat. But this desire, even when there is no hope of possible satisfaction, continues to be prized, and even to be preferred to anything else in the world, by those who have once felt it. This hunger is better than any other fullness, this poverty better than all other wealth. And thus it comes about that if the desire is long absent, it may itself be desired, and that new desiring becomes a new instance of the original desire, though the subject may not at once recognize the fact, and thus cries out for his lost youth of soul at the very moment in which he is being rejuvenated. This sounds complicated, but it is simple when we live it. Oh, to feel as I did then, we cry, not noticing that even while we say the words, the very feeling whose loss we lament is rising again in all its old bitter sweetness. For this sweet desire cuts across our ordinary distinctions between wanting and having. To have it is, by definition, a want. To want it, we find, is to have it. In the second place, there is a peculiar mystery about the object of this desire. Inexperienced people and inattention leave some inexperienced all their lives. Suppose, when they feel it, that they know what they are desiring. Thus, if it comes to a child while he is looking at a far-off hillside, he at once thinks, if only I were there. If it comes when he is remembering some event in the past, he thinks, if only I could go back to those days. If it comes a little later while he is reading a romantic tale or poem of perilous sea and fairylands forlorn, he thinks he is wishing that such places really existed and that he could reach them. If it comes later still in a context with erotic suggestions, he believes he is desiring the perfect beloved. If he falls upon literature like Maeterlinck or the early Yeats, which treats of spirits and the like with some show of serious belief, he may think that he is hankering for real magic and occultism. When it darts out upon him from his studies in history or science, he may confuse it with the intellectual craving for knowledge. But every one of these impressions is wrong. The sole merit I claim for this book is that it is written by one who has proved them all to be wrong. There is no room for vanity in the claim. I know them to be wrong not by intelligence, but by experience. Such experience as would not have come my way if my youth had been wiser, more virtuous, and less self-centered than it was. For I have myself been deluded by every one of these false answers in turn, and have contemplated each of them earnestly enough to discover the cheat. To have embraced so many false Florimels is no matter for boasting. It is fools, they say, who learn by experience. But since they do at least learn, let a fool bring his experience into the common stock, that wiser men profit by it. Absolutely beautiful. So beautiful that I hate to tell you the news that I have. We're going to take a hiatus from Lewis for a little while until I figure out fair use and copyright laws for monetization. I'm not sure that any of the platforms have the granularity to discern between profit and nonprofit organizations. As a nonprofit, I do have some leeway as to what can be used as teaching material that I wouldn't have as a for-profit business. In other words, I can use someone's book as teaching material so long as I don't make a personal profit off of their work. So far, we're okay, I think at least. Anyone who knows their copyright law back and forth, I'd love to talk with you. Once these channels get monetized, I will have to figure out if the services involved spend time to differentiate between a 501c3 and other business types. If they don't, then I will have to remove any videos which contain copyrighted material. Lewis's work does not enter the public domain until sometime in the 2030s. But that's the bad news. The good news is that there is enough Christian literature in the public domain to last a literal lifetime. I would think that the Lewis family or foundation would be okay with churches using Lewis's material the way that I do, if not for the spiritual ramifications, then at least for the increase in book sales that I know happens because of these lessons. I am sure I increased their sales and did not diminish them, not one bit. But the letter of the law hardly ever gives way to the spirit of the law, especially if there is money to be made in court over the dispute. I don't think they would do that, but I do want to be as honest and as fair as I can. The Savior I worship submitted himself to the law when it didn't mean anything, and it didn't mean spiritual neutering, like taxes, and so shall I. And yes, dear angry lady, the Mass did matter. I'm sorry you still don't see it, aka lighting incense to Caesar. James 4:17 says this, "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him, it is sin." It does not say whoever knows the right thing to do and does not do it because the government says not to is a really brave, honorable, sinless man. Nope. But I digress. As a self-critiquing Lewisite, I should digress more. Anywho, I have been going over some public domain libraries like the Gutenberg Project, and I noticed that Augustine's Confessions are available for use. If you bought the Chronicles of Narnia on my recommendation, read it. You will love it. I'll even buy it from you if you don't want it. That offer is only good for remnant members. For you would be the only ones who knew in advance my plans to read it. And I might continue with the plan after learning all I need to know about copyright and streaming laws. Right now, though, better safe than sorry. I actually had this thought a month or two ago, but was too far into the regress to let you down easily. But like I said, there's a wealth of freebies out there that in truth are far deeper and more enriching than anything written in the last 200 years. Lewis himself would agree with me on that. His education was deeply entrenched in the ancient writers, both Christian and pagan. If you have never read the Confessions, you are in for a treat. I will be reading in the older English translations, so it will sound very much like our journey through Pilgrim's Progress, if you remember that. For those that purchased who do purchase modern English translations of the books we have done so far, continue to do so for your own reading pleasure, but don't avoid the lessons because we're going to go with the older English. I think that you will find that when I read it out loud, it is a lot easier to follow than trying to figure out the old style by yourself while trying to enjoy a great work. I only know it because I learned it at my mother's knee. Sit with me for a while, and I assure you, you will learn to love the old style as much as I do. It has beauty and depth which has been lost to us as Lucifer and his people have stripped our language in order to strip our intellects and our ability to communicate effectively and to think effectively. You must have rich words and encyclopedic knowledge of the dictionary to have super deep thoughts. That is why it takes so long to train a philosopher. I will also try to remember to put a link to the Confessions from which I will be working if you are interested. You can get it for free online with a simple search, but I personally have a hard time studying from digital copies and from e-readers. So I will try to, like I say, I'll try to include the link to the one that I'm, to the hardback that I'm using. It's an Every Man's Library edition, which is an absolutely beautiful copy. You will like it if you get it. As for now, Christ is King. Hail to the King, And Godspeed, you serpent-skinned doves. Camouflage, guaranteed to scare wolves away.